There is a night, and maybe you are living inside it right now, when everything you built your identity on stops holding weight. The career that once gave you purpose starts to feel like a costume. The relationship you were sure would last starts to feel like two strangers sharing a house. The body you never had to think about starts sending signals you can no longer ignore. Fatigue that sleep doesn't touch, a tightness in the chest with no medical name, a sadness that arises with no obvious cause. Maybe it looks like lying awake at 3 a.m, running through decisions you can no longer remember making, wondering when exactly you became someone you don't fully recognize. Maybe it looks like sitting in a car in your own driveway, unable to go inside, because going inside means returning to a version of your life that no longer fits. Maybe it's quieter than that, just a persistent flatness, a sense that you're watching your own days happen to you rather than living them. And underneath it, a single, quiet, terrifying thought: something is wrong with me. I want to gently take that thought apart tonight because I don't believe it's true. I believe something was wrong with the life you were living, not with you. And I believe what feels like collapse may actually be the most intelligent, most necessary event your psyche has ever engineered on your behalf. Stay with me through this, because by the end, I want you to be able to look back at your hardest season, whether it's behind you or whether you're standing in the middle of it tonight, and see it not as evidence of your failure, but as the opening act of your becoming. To understand why, we need to talk about the part of you that operates beneath your conscious awareness, what the psychiatrist Carl Jung called the unconscious. Not a storage room for forgotten memories, but something closer to a second intelligence, running quietly beneath the one you use to answer emails and plan your week. It remembers everything you had to leave behind in order to survive. It keeps the record of every part of yourself that once got you rejected, punished, or unseen. And it simply hid that part away, the way a person learns to hide a wound so it will stop being touched. Almost everyone builds what Jung called a persona in order to move through the world. The persona is not fake, it's functional. It's the version of you that learned to be agreeable, capable, easygoing, strong, low maintenance, whatever your particular family, culture, or circumstances required in exchange for love and safety. For years, sometimes decades, the persona works exactly as designed. It gets the job, it keeps the peace, it holds the marriage together, it earns the praise. But a persona was never built to be a whole self. It was built to solve a specific problem, usually one that started in childhood. And the parts of you that didn't fit the solution, your anger, your needs, your ambition, your softness, your appetite, whatever wasn't welcome in the room you grew up in, don't disappear simply because they go unused. They go underground. Jung called this exiled material the shadow, and it plays a far bigger role in your hardest season than almost anyone realizes. Individuation is the long, often uninvited process of becoming whole again, of the parts you exiled being let back in so that the specific, undivided person you actually are can finally exist instead of the composite of everyone else's requirements. It is rarely comfortable because it usually requires the very persona that kept you safe to be taken apart first. This is why the hardest season of your life so often looks from the outside like falling apart. From the inside, from the unconscious's point of view, it is closer to a long overdue renovation, the kind that has to gut a structure before it can be rebuilt on solid ground. Before we go further, I want to be honest about what this is not, because this territory gets romanticized in ways that don't serve anyone. Individuation is not a spiritual bypass. It is not a license to abandon your responsibilities, hurt the people who love you, or excuse cruelty in the name of finding yourself. It is not a performance for an audience, and it cannot be rushed by wanting it badly enough. It is slow, often unglamorous, frequently invisible to everyone but you, and it asks for honesty rather than intensity. Keep that in mind as we go, because the version of this process that actually transforms a life looks far quieter than the version usually sold to us. It is also not a guarantee. I want to be careful here because it will be easy to end this video suggesting that if you simply follow the right steps, your hardest season will resolve into some clean, triumphant transformation on a predictable schedule. That isn't honest, and it isn't how this actually works for most people. Some seasons resolve in clarity. Others simply loosen, slowly, into something more livable, without ever producing a single dramatic turning point. Both are individuation. The goal was never a happy ending on cue. It was becoming more truthfully yourself. And truth doesn't always arrive wrapped in resolution. This is not a new idea, even though it can feel like a strange one the first time you hear it. Long before Jung gave it a clinical name, mystics across very different traditions described the same pattern using their own language. The 16th century Christian mystic John of the Cross wrote of a dark night of the soul, a period in which everything that once gave a person comfort and certainty is stripped away, not as punishment, but as the necessary clearing that precedes a deeper union with the sacred. Alchemists, whose symbolic language Jung studied closely in his later work, described a stage they called the nigredo, the blackening. The raw material of a life had to be broken down into something like ash before it could be transformed into anything of value. Different centuries, different vocabularies, the same underlying observation. Transformation is very rarely gentle, and it is almost never optional once it has begun. I mention this because if you are in the middle of your own dark night right now, I want you to know you are not the first person to mistake the beginning of a transformation for the end of everything. Every tradition that has taken the inner life seriously has arrived independently at the same uncomfortable truth. Something usually has to fall apart before something more honest can be built. Now, let's talk about the shadow for a moment, because it explains something that confuses almost everyone going through this season. Why other people suddenly seem to irritate you so intensely, sometimes for reasons you can't fully justify. The shadow holds everything about yourself you were taught was unacceptable. Too much anger, too much need, too much ambition, too much softness, too much darkness. Because you can't look directly at what you've exiled, the unconscious does something clever. It shows it to you and other people instead. The colleague whose confidence enrages you may be carrying the confidence you were never allowed to have. The friend whose neediness repels you may be echoing a need in yourself that you learned long ago to bury and never mention again. This is not a flaw in you. It is one of the unconscious's oldest and most reliable methods of communication. During your hardest season, when the persona is already cracking, the shadow tends to surface with unusual force, which is why people in the middle of individuation often report feeling uncharacteristically reactive, easily triggered, unlike themselves. You are not becoming a worse person in this season. You're finally seeing the parts of yourself the persona spent years keeping carefully out of view. So how do you know if what you're living through is not simply a breakdown, but the unconscious actively at work, moving you toward individuation? Here are 9 signs. The first sign is that your old roles no longer fit, even the ones that once felt like home. You go through the motions of the job, the relationship, the family position, but some part of you watches from a slight distance, unconvinced. That distance is not ingratitude. It is the self quietly refusing to keep wearing a costume it has outgrown. The second sign is a loneliness that persists even in good company. You can be loved, surrounded, cared for, and still feel unreachable, because the part of you that most needs to be seen has never actually been shown to anyone, including yourself. The third sign is old material resurfacing uninvited. Memories, griefs, resentments you thought were long resolved, arriving again with surprising force. This is not regression. The unconscious brings up what was buried whenever it senses there is finally enough strength or enough desperation to look at it honestly. The fourth sign is an intensifying dream life. Vivid, strange, sometimes unsettling dreams that linger long into your day. Dreams are the unconscious's native language, symbol rather than sentence, and they tend to grow louder whenever your waking mind has stopped listening to quieter forms of intuition. The fifth sign is a falling away of old motivations. Money, status, approval, achievement, the things that used to reliably get you out of bed stop working the same way. This can masquerade as burnout, but it is often something closer to disillusionment. You're losing faith in a version of success that was never actually yours to begin with, only borrowed from people you were trying to please. The sixth sign is a quiet, persistent inner voice. Some people call it a knowing, others an ache, pointing towards something you can't yet fully name, a direction, a truth, a person you sense you are meant to become, without being able to picture them clearly yet. The seventh sign is sudden, disproportionate irritation at specific people, the shadow, doing exactly what we just described, showing you an exiled part of yourself through someone else's behavior at a volume too loud to ignore. The eighth sign is an unusual pull towards solitude, silence, or nature, an instinct to withdraw, not out of despair, but because something in you needs quiet in order to be heard at all. And the ninth sign is the appearance of meaningful coincidences, a phrase, a stranger's comment, a book falling open to exactly the right page, arriving at precisely the moment you needed it. Jung called this synchronicity, not magic, but the unsettling, often comforting sense that the inner and outer worlds are for a while moving in the same direction. There is a tenth sign, and it's the one people are usually most reluctant to admit. A strange, private relief underneath the fear. Not happiness, relief. The particular relief of no longer being able to keep performing something you were already exhausted by. If you felt even a flicker of that relief alongside the grief and disorientation, take it as one of the clearer signs of all. Collapse rarely comes with relief attached, unless some part of you has been quietly waiting for permission to stop. If several of those signs found you, here's the path through this season, not around it, because there rarely is a way around. The first step is to stop treating the collapse as an emergency to be resolved. This is the hardest instruction and the most important one. As long as you are fighting to get back to how things were, you remain at war with your own unconscious, which has no interest in returning you to a life it just spent considerable effort dismantling. The task is not to fix the crisis. It is to ask, honestly, what it is trying to tell you. The second step is to turn toward the difficult feelings instead of managing them away. Grief, rage, shame, fear, these are not obstacles to individuation. They are its raw material. I think of a woman I'll call Anne, who spent nearly 2 years trying to outrun a grief that followed the end of her marriage, filling every evening so there would be no silence left for it to speak in. It was only when she finally stopped trying to feel better and let herself feel exactly what was there that the grief, paradoxically, began to move through her instead of sitting frozen inside her. The third step is to track your dreams and your symbols. Keep something by the bed. Write down fragments, images, even feelings upon waking without rushing to interpret them. Patterns tend to emerge over weeks and months, sometimes recurring images that mean nothing to anyone else and everything to you. The unconscious is remarkably consistent once you start paying attention to its particular vocabulary. The fourth step is to actually grieve the identity you're losing, rather than skipping past it toward whatever comes next. A version of you is dying, in the fullest sense of that word, and it deserves mourning, even if it was a version that no longer served you. Skipping this step is one of the most common reasons people get stuck halfway through individuation. Neither fully in the old self, nor able to arrive in the new one, suspended in a kind of identity limbo. The fifth step is to return to the body. The unconscious doesn't only speak through dreams, it speaks through the chest that tightens, the stomach that clenches, the exhaustion sleep doesn't fix. Long before the thinking mind understands what's happening, the body already knows. I think of a man I'll call David, who carried a quiet, unexplained back pain for the better part of a decade, managing it with painkillers and denial, until the season of his life that finally broke him open also strangely coincided with a pain no doctor had ever been able to fully explain, finally beginning to ease. Learning to simply ask the body what it's holding often gets you further than analysis alone ever could. The sixth step is to own your projections. When you notice sudden, disproportionate irritation at someone, pause and ask what part of yourself that person might be reflecting back to you. This single practice, however uncomfortable, is one of the fastest routes back to the exiled parts of the self, because it turns your most reactive moments into your most useful information. The seventh step is to create something, however small. Write, draw, build, arrange, rearrange. Jung called this active imagination, giving the unconscious a form outside your own head so it can be examined rather than simply endured in silence. You do not need talent for this. You need only willingness. I think of a man I'll call Thomas, who had never considered himself remotely artistic, who began almost by accident sketching the images from his dreams in a cheap notebook during his hardest year. He never showed them to anyone. He wasn't trying to make anything good. But something about giving those images a shape outside his own head, rather than turning them over endlessly inside it, seemed to loosen a grip he hadn't fully realized was there. The eighth step is to find at least one honest witness for what you're going through. A therapist, a wise friend, a support group, someone capable of sitting with your uncertainty without rushing you toward resolution. Individuation was never meant to happen entirely alone. Even the most solitary inner journeys tend to go better with someone standing at the edge of them, simply bearing witness. And the ninth step is to let the season take exactly as long as it takes. Individuation has no fixed timeline. It moves at the pace of a gestation, not a project plan, and it cannot be negotiated down by sheer willpower. Almost everyone I've seen move through their hardest season with real wholeness eventually stopped asking, "How do I make this end?" and started asking, "What is this trying to show me?" instead. That shift in the question, more than any single technique, tends to be the real turning point. If even one or two of those 9 signs describe something you're living through right now, I would genuinely like to know which ones. Not for the algorithm, for you. Naming what's happening, even in a comment section full of strangers, is often the first real act of the witnessing this whole process asks for. So if you're willing, which sign found you? Which step feels hardest? Or if it's simpler, just tell me what season you're in right now, in a sentence or two. Sometimes the smallest act of saying it plainly, "This is hard, and I don't fully understand it yet," is the beginning of the unconscious finally being heard instead of endured in silence. Here's what I most want you to carry out of everything we've covered tonight. The hardest season of your life is not a detour from your becoming. It may be the most direct route to it that you have ever been offered. Every persona you built was necessary once. It kept you safe, loved, employed, functional, at a time when the whole, unguarded self might not have survived exposure. None of them were ever meant to be permanent. They were shelters for a self that hadn't yet had the safety, the age, or the crisis required to fully arrive. You are not falling apart. You are being asked, often against your will, to stop performing a life and start living one that is unmistakably, irreducibly your own. That doesn't make the season painless, and I won't pretend it does. It won't feel meaningful most days. Some days it will simply feel like loss, plain and unadorned. And that is allowed too. Grief doesn't need to be poetic to be legitimate. But underneath the loss, something in you already senses what it's moving toward, even if your conscious mind can't picture it clearly yet. That intelligence has been trying to reach you for a very long time, through every symptom, every dream, every unexplained ache, every person who has irritated you more than they reasonably should have. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you were trained to be, not who kept the peace, or paid the bills, or made everyone around you comfortable. Who you truly are. I don't see any of this to romanticize what you're going through. If you're in the middle of it tonight, romanticizing it probably feels like an insult. The nights are still long. The uncertainty is still real. Nobody can tell you exactly what's on the other side of this, including me, because individuation doesn't arrive at a fixed destination. It arrives at a way of living that is finally, unmistakably your own. And that looks different for every person who moves through it. What I can tell you is this: almost no one who has come out the other side of their hardest season, however long it took, describes wishing they had simply gone back to who they were before. Not because the before was worthless, but because the after was in some quiet, hard-won way more honest, more theirs, less borrowed from everyone who needed them to stay small, agreeable, or convenient. So if tonight finds you in the middle of your own unraveling, let this be the thought you take with you into whatever comes next. You are not broken. You are becoming. And becoming, however it feels while it's happening, has never once been the same thing as falling apart. If this season has taken almost everything from you, consider this before you go. Maybe it was never trying to take your life apart. Maybe it was clearing the only space large enough for you to finally stand in, fully and for the first time, as yourself.